Welcome back to Building Research Relevance. My name is Stephen Shaw from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. You can tell I have my Quebec shirt on today. We talked last time about whether we're professionals or technicians, and trying to make the case that we really need more professionals and intellectuals in our field in order to make work more relevant. Not more intellectuals, but more people behaving in an intellectual manner. What I'd like to talk about today is the importance of theory and models, and why that will actually make research more relevant to clinical practice and improve the quality of clinical work, including classroom teaching. Now, I do a lot of keynote addresses and a lot of professional development workshops, and I hear the same thing all the time. We want you to be practical. Leave that theory back at the university and give us the practical stuff. Or I hear the other thing. We like you because you are practical. You don't just give us that theory knowledge. Well, I think the theory versus practical dichotomy there is just exactly wrong. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But the other part is just as a definitional little thing here. A theory, remember, is not a hunch or a hypothesis or speculation or some harebrained idea. A theory is the highest level of science that there is. It weaves dozens, if not hundreds of facts into a coherent framework. And tying research to a framework is exactly what we need to be more relevant, whether you're teaching a classroom lesson or providing therapy or conducting assessment or providing new ideas for research and asking the right questions. You really have to have this framework to get started. And here's why. I look at this as the three little pigs argument. Remember, the three little pigs, the issue is the big bad wolf will come and blow your house down. And the big bad wolf is really just reality coming to roost. Whether you are doing research and you're collecting data, that data is a test of your house. That's the purpose of data, to test your hypotheses, or your hypotheses are based on your theory. If you're teaching in the classroom, you might have the best lesson plan, the best well-developed ideas, the best tips and tricks available, and yet the classroom, whether it's a specific child or an incident happens, or there's behavior problems, or we have, who knows, we have a pandemic, something will come up. Some aspect of reality will come into your world and mess things up. And so what you need to have when we talk about research relevance, we need to have something that can withstand the huffing and puffing of the big bad wolf, which means reality. What's going to withstand reality? Because it's hard to predict what's going to happen in context. Just think about what we do. I'm a psychologist, and I know nobody ever said, here's the typical student who's doing really well and they're average in every way, go see the psychologist. We get to see the ones who are challenges. And in fact, you need to prepare yourself as a researcher for data challenges. Things will come back that you don't expect. A child will respond differently to your manualized intervention than you might have wanted. That's when it blows down your house. And if all you have is a hastily put together treatment plan or teaching plan or methodology without a theory, then it simply cannot withstand any stress of an idea that's different, of something that comes in and disruptive. And it's not really useful anyway. So the research is simply data that's compared to other data. And as an editor, I see this all the time of someone correlates one test with another test and says that means something. It might not, I don't know. Does it really advance knowledge? No, not really. Quite often they need to use some sort of harking or p-hacking to try to make sense of this reality that's not even compared to anything. It's just a straw house. And that's what happens. The same thing happens when we teach people how to do specific techniques, but we don't teach them why they do it, or under what questions are we trying to ask? What is the theory behind it all? Without that, it's really, really tough. Tips and tricks. I learned this right away. When I went to work for a hospital, my very first case, I was supposed to do a cognitive assessment. Okay, I can do that. I've been taught how to do it, how to administer multiple types of cognitive, memory, personality, academic achievement. All these tests, I've learned how to do them. But the first case I saw at the hospital was a child with Goldenhar syndrome. And Goldenhar syndrome is a genetic disorder where kids often have skin tags. But this child had and kind of central malformations that make a child look quite different. And this child had quite a significant case because, which is quite common, he had no exterior ears. But he also had no eyes. He had no globe for the eyes, so he just didn't have them. He also had severe oral motor problems that affected speech development. Now, if all I needed to do was to give a wisp, because that's the tip and the trick that I had, then that is completely useless. The big bad wolf has come in and blown my house down because all I had was a straw house built out of tips and tricks. But because I knew theories of cognitive development, I could quickly develop a test of classical conditioning based on what I had, the materials I had, what this child had, which was, despite not having ears, he had fairly good hearing, had some hearing acuity. It was just the exterior ear folds were not developed. He also had a good sense of touch and could communicate via touch fairly well. And so I could create a test of classical conditioning, then a test of second-order conditioning. I could create some quick Piagetian tasks where we start pairing things together to see how this child could learn. But because I knew theory, we had a measure or way to determine cognitive ability. Maybe not as detailed, but I knew theory more than just tips and tricks. So my house didn't get totally blown down because I could not administer a whisk or a Stanford Binet or any of the other measures. So these tips and tricks are great until they run into reality. And the more challenging the population you work with, the stronger the big bad wolf's going to be. So you really have to have a good theory to ground your ideas in. Now the stick house, that's what you do when you have a strong, let's say you're a teacher, you have a strong lesson plan that's based on research, it's really well regarded, it's been run several different times under several different conditions, it's solid. If you're doing an assessment plan, you have a good solid assessment plan based on strong principles and research. If you're conducting research, you're couching your literature, your new method in other literature that's been done. This is fantastic. It makes a stronger case because you have a stronger framework from which to do. You can change things around a little bit. It can withstand new data or interesting, weird ideas to some degree. But what happens when you have something really unusual? You suddenly have, let's say you're a classroom teacher and you have a child coming in who doesn't speak English at all, or whatever the language of your classroom is. Let's say you're a clinical practitioner and you suddenly have a case of a child who doesn't have use of his hands when you're doing manipulation of objects in some of the assessments you had planned. Let's say you're a researcher and suddenly the data come out so different from what you expected that you really don't even have a case at all. So anything that comes out really weird, again, the stick house of good, solid treatments based on research, it's pretty good. It works pretty well. But what happens when things are really different? Can you make big changes? Not really. You're a little stuck, but you're a little bit stronger than the straw house. The straw house built out of tips and tricks. But what you really want to do to help move our field ahead and make our research relevant and our clinical practice really strong because it's based on research, you need to build that brick house. A brick house has a strong theory foundation. Remember, theory is a framework from which you build your questions, your research questions, or your clinical questions that you're trying to have answered. Then you have a super strong foundation. Why you want a super strong foundation in clinical work, in a theoretical work, in a theoretical foundation in clinical work, is what if you have to make big changes? Say, I'm teaching this course in English, but I have a large French population, and I will have to make some adjustments based on that population and based on that culture. how do I know that those changes that I have to make to meet the reality that I have, how will I know that it's still going to be representative of the original idea that works so well? Well, you need a theory for that. And so this is why we have that strong house. Right now, good research is out there, but it's not really based on theory most of the time. And so what we have is a really good pile of bricks. This pile of bricks, each brick is solid and good and fine. Each study seems to be a good brick, but it's just a pile right now. What we need to have is a designer to build a strong house. We could use more theoreticians to take these bricks and design a house. And once we have that, it helps guide all of our teaching practices, all of our therapy practices, all of our assessment practices. But right now we don't have that. And I hear a lot in research, people talking about the replication crisis and how we should do more replications. And that's fine. But what it really does is ensure our bricks are better, that we have really high quality bricks. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. What we really need are great house designs. Which is a theory, or at least a blueprint. And I think of a blueprint as more of a model, kind of a model, sort of a sub-theory as I look at it. But once we have a theory or a model, we can determine exactly what kind of bricks we need and continuously improve upon our house. Now, there's a really good, very brief article, I think it was in Nature, maybe a year ago or so, by Iris Van Roy, who did a really good work, but she talks about models and the importance of models in research. And really a model, a representation, which is what a model is, a representation of reality being four different things. The object, the thing being represented, the thing doing the representing, the medium, which is maybe a classroom lesson plan or an assessment plan or a research design, the content of the representation, which might be how the information is getting across. Kind of the methods are the medium, the thing doing the representation, which is more like the measures or the curriculum. The content meaning how you're doing it and what it means. And then the agent or system who's using the representation, the user. So really you've got all of these things. If you're a clinician, the way you can think about this is that you need to know the professional, what the person animating the theory, the research, the teaching classes, the therapy sessions, what that person's lens is, the content, what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it, and then what the receiver is, or the student, the client, whomever. That's a good way for clinicians to think of a model. For researchers, a good way to think of a model, and this is again from Dr. Van Roy, a good way to think of it from the researcher's perspective is if you can draw a picture that represents the object, the medium, the meaning of what you're trying to do, and the user, or who the end state person is, the reader, I suppose, or something like that. If you can draw a picture that puts all four of those elements together, now you have a model. And you may not need a big, giant, massive picture. Let me try that again. A big, giant, massive framework that is part of a theory. But if you can at least have a model, a representation of object, medium, meaning, and the user, if you can have that represented, then what you have is a stronger foundation. You have a brick house. You have a brick house that can withstand and be adaptive to all of the changes and the threats. I don't want to say threat sounds bad. That has a bad connotation. But all of the challenges to your ideas, all those are going to keep coming. And if you have a brick house, you can withstand them. I kind of like a brick house with some flexibility, kind of like skyscrapers move in the wind because they have to or else they would fall apart. Your brick house that you're created because you have a theory needs to be flexible enough to change, but strong enough to maintain its integrity, because if work's going to be relevant, it has to maintain and be useful in the challenges of the real world, and we don't know what to expect. So I really do like the trite but true saying. I think it was Kurt Levin who really came up with the idea that he always said the most practical thing you can have is good theory. And I think that is completely true. If we're going to have research that is relevant to clinical practice, we need research based on theory, or research that tests and challenges theory, or research that's useful for developing good theory. Without that, at least if we can have a model with object, medium, meaning, and user all put together, that can create a useful research too, a relevant research. So that's kind of a lot in a very short period of time, but use models, use theory. There is nothing that's more relevant, and don't be afraid of good theory. Thanks so much, and I will see you at the next time for Building Research Relevance.